like a number of things that FM said, of course, he then contradicts himself. Because he in the books, he writes this laborious process of you first send the first direction, and you have to maintain the first direction while you send the second direction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we hear from people who studied with him two slightly different phrases. One was that he said to them, give the directions one after the other and all at the same time. Yeah. And then I think someone else said, oh, he said to me, give them all together and one after the other. So it seems to me, I mean, don't you all find really from your practical experience that yes, it starts off in your learning process as a sequence, and I'll come back to that as to why that is in a moment, but eventually it's really more of a gestalt, it's really more of a totality, it really does happen all at once. And that Nikolai Bernstein, the great Soviet scientist studying coordination of posture movements, also studied how we learn physical skills. And the same thing happens in the learning of all physical skills, really. We laboriously master each step by step by step, and then it just coheres.
I was more talking about the actual teaching of that,
yeah,
the actual building the skill of doing that.
Yeah, that's where I think you do need to start up here. And the reason is really pretty simple. It's not that by starting up here you'll get everything else, but it's as simple as the fact that if the orientation at the head end is there, you could say, quite simply, your head is the steering apparatus. As you walk down the street, if something catches your eye over there, you look, and your musculature, subtle little preparatory shifts of muscle tone are happening in case you might want to start to walk that way, because the chances are you will. You know, when your eyes and head have gone somewhere, it's likely you're going there. There's a, I don't know if you have it over here, there's a TV program in the States called Law and Order. There are so many different versions of it. Every night on some channel, every night of the week, there's at least one version, an episode of Law and Order. They follow such a formula that there's always a moment when the cops come out and they arrest the suspect and they put him in the back seat of the cop car. How do they put him in the back seat? They push his head. So that's how I say to people, your head is the steering apparatus. And if you're going around, it's like the cop's hand is doing that to you. You're doing that to yourself. The message you're giving your body is get ready to go that way. So if we're going to actually open up the whole body, if we're going to stimulate anti-gravity postural support processes, if the steering wheel is pointing everything that way, we're kind of not going to get very far. So you need an overall this-way orientation as a starting point. That seems to me to be essential. But it's not enough by itself. You've got to get this, coax the organization through the entire body that then gives more and more support for the head from the whole body in such a way that you're not using your trunk muscles to have to brace yourself, because that screws your breathing. It's when you get the support of the head from the whole body that you're free to breathe in the natural way. With the back lengthening and widening. Yeah. But I know you've probably seen this happen, David. If you're supervising one of your third-year students who's starting to teach, and sometimes by the time they've gotten to that stage of the training, they've really got a powerful sense of this as a whole body response, and a powerful sense of how, as Elizabeth Walker said, the up comes from your feet on the ground. But the trouble is they've gotten so into that they've forgotten what it's like to be a beginner. So there they are, working away with a brand new student. The brand new student is standing there like this. And the third year, one trainee teacher is saying now, think of your feet just softening into the ground. Let the feet spread into the ground. That's right. And I'm standing at the back of the room trying to catch the teacher's eye. And I'm going. So, yeah, you've got to have that fundamental orientation. Does that answer your question?
I guess it's more on how to teach that to beginners.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
do you mean in terms of what does it mean by directing or sending a direction? Do you mean that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it mean to send a direction for someone who, yeah.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Who are you working with, really, in a way, isn't it?
Well, you see, that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out in the sense that it's like we've been saying a little over these last 2 days. If you make something totally general, then it fades away into nothingness. So, you know, I could dodge the whole thing by saying, well, it depends on who you're talking to, and then I get out of having to answer the question. But I won't do that. There's ways that I can explain it that are quite a little bit more advanced and complex and wouldn't work for a beginner. But might be useful to say to you first, because I think teachers have to have the more complex and deeper understanding so that they can then give a simple answer, but a simple answer that's based on some real knowledge. So one way that I find it helpful these days to think about it is that when I walk across the room to pick up something like the whiteboard marker, I have an objective, an end in Alexander jargon, which is pick up the whiteboard marker. Even without the Alexander technique, the parts of my brain that handle coordination have a few other objectives or parallel intentions along with getting that. The main one, of course, is don't let your head hit the ground. Other ones will be don't bump into anything, don't trip over the wires, etc. So, you know, parts of me are already processing several intentions that have to be correlated to the basic one of pick up this. You could call them also priorities. And I think at a neuroscience level, what we're doing when we're directing is we're adding some further priorities or intentions. It's almost like we're saying to the whole system, you know, when I go over there to put this back on there, I want to achieve that, and I don't want my head to hit the ground, but no, I'd like you to achieve that in a slightly more refined way, please. I'd like not just to have my head not hit the ground, but I'd like my head to be supported in such a way that my neck is free, my back is lengthening and widening, my ribs are free to move, and I'm not braced in the limbs. So I'm adding some extra demands. I'm asking for some more refinement. Now, you can't say that to a new student, obviously. So, but it's useful to have some background knowledge of that kind of thing. That, you know, that may, when we come to start doing more functional MRI and stuff like that on people when they're directing. Do you know, by the way, that the one and only experiment so far on functional MRI of what's happening in somebody's brain when they're directing, the guy who did the work, the experiment, said that they talk about parts of the brain lighting up. he said what really lit up was the brain stem. The lowest, oldest part of the brain lit up. And that's actually the part that organizes background muscle tone and postural tone and breathing. That's pretty damn nice from that point of view. But anyway, so, okay, let's come down to it at a simpler level. Alexander, in one or two places, refers to directions as a wish. He says, there's a sentence, I know it off by heart, he says, giving the directions in the form, as it were, of a wish. And I've always thought to myself, why did he toss in that little phrase, as it were? What's the point of that? But, he's saying, giving the directions as if they were a wish. And some of the other first generation teachers used to say that. You've got to actually have some intention for where the parts of your body are going when you release muscles. This is a very obvious one up here. If I completely release my neck muscles, my head falls down. Absolutely no doubt about it. And this is another reason why I prefer myself when I'm teaching to right from the get-go talk about redistribution of tone rather than orient it all around letting go and releasing and having no tension and doing less and so on and so forth. You actually got to have some tone in your neck and back, otherwise it all falls down. If I release my shoulders, they fall down and forward. And the weight of my arms drags my body down. So all release in an Alexander context is release in the most appropriate direction. It's releasing so that your body can be up and open at its full natural expansiveness. So every release has to be accompanied by a direction. Otherwise, it all falls down and in. And I tend to find it, fairly okay with beginners to convey something along those lines, that there has to be a direction to the release, otherwise it all falls down. I have another line that I kind of like, which is, you could say we're dealing with what your muscles do, but what is it that controls your muscles? Well, if we were to cut all the nerves that link your muscles to your spinal cord, and thereby to your brain, your muscles won't do anything. Your muscles are helpless and inert unless your brain, nervous system tells them what to do. So we agree on that. Your brain is going to tell your muscles what to do. Your brain is in charge of your muscles. The real question is, who's in charge of your brain? That's a tricky one. Big, big philosophical question. Well, we don't have the answer to it, but we're going to assume for practical purposes that you, whoever you are, there's another big philosophical question, that you have some influence over that brain, and you can use your consciousness, therefore, to have some influence over how that brain organizes the distribution of muscle tone. Is it organized in such a way that you are up and open, moving easily and able to breathe by maximizing, optimizing the intrinsic, elastic, springy, anti-gravity responses? Or is it organized so that you're pressed down into yourself, braced for effort? Or there again, is it organized in such a way that you've kind of given up the whole thing? It's all just too much effort. So you sort of see so you can go along around those kind of things. Are we getting enough on that, do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Micah?
I'm just interested in you returning to Ron's question and the process whereby a relatively new teacher may not be as effective as they might be 5 or 10 or 20 years down the track, but they're still